This episode of the Disruption Lab is taped in front of a live studio audience. Ashley, you've helped shape what smart city means in multiple cities, but take us back. What was the one moment where you felt a major breakthrough was possible, or one where it almost broke you?
Well, it might be easier to start with the broke. I think the work that you and I were undertaking years ago, I think we had a really interesting idea. I think we knew that it would take many different kind of years of effort. I mean, we know cities are messy and it takes a long time to kind of build a system in a city. And I think we tried really, really hard, I think because of people leaving jobs,
right.
Like me leaving in the middle of the implementation starting. Right. It was a real bummer for me because there was a big idea that they relied heavily on me in City Hall to implement. And so you learn a lot about kind of not just what the technology is and the promise of that technology, but then all of the kind of interactions and systems around it that have to come up with the technology. So the policy, the kind of operationalizing all the data, all of those things require another level of investment of time and practice that we just weren't ready for at City Hall. So learned a lot from that, but I think it also still seems to be an opportunity to learn from, and so therefore I have no regrets.
So to just kind of pull on that thread a little bit, a lot of your work in city government has been under, I guess I'll characterize it under specific administrations, but it seems like when those administrations change, then it's just like when you left.
Yep.
That transition between administrations, do you see that as something that hinders a lot of innovation within municipal government and within kind of this public arena?
I think when I first left Los Angeles, so I lived there for a few years before moving to Kansas City, and I had built some things there that kind of just went away after I left. And that was heartbreaking because you realize you need to think beyond yourself and your big idea and the energy that I can bring to an idea to really thinking about socializing it and helping others kind of see the value in bringing that idea forward. And I think what we have learned in kind of this space is that innovation is changing kind of what the dynamic of kind of the solutions are, but the problem has been around for a very, very long time, and we need to be okay with taking a lot more time to see that innovation play out. And I think that's where engaging kind of the bureaucrats, the people that are professionals that show up day in and day out on behalf of their city to do the work, they need to be part of that innovation process for it really to make the type of long-lasting changes necessary that will kind of weather some of the political storms that we see.
Do you see that that's occurring more frequently now, or do you think that that's still a challenge within, kind of the domain itself?
I think it's very challenging right now because I don't think we're all working from the same truth. And I think that makes it very challenging. But with that, I'm woefully optimistic, perhaps, that I run towards these kind of challenges because I think this kind of the threat that we see to some of our kind of norms and institutions and things that we've known has really forced us to figure out how to do things differently. And I think the kind of locking arms with others is part of that. And I think that's very encouraging. And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for incredible innovation, particularly when it comes to our civic institutions, which are ripe for it.
Yeah, necessity is the mother of invention. I
Absolutely.
think we've reached that point where everybody's, either had enough or they don't have any alternatives.
Yeah. And we can't disagree that a lot of the system is broken. It's not working for everyone, and that's a big issue. So I think we need to kind of now at the local level really kind of figure out how can we work on these problems together.
So as a leader in a lot of these spaces, what do you think is the thing that the public maybe generally misunderstands about how change happens in government?
Well, change is a lot harder in government. There is no business that goes out and has to consult with every single person to come up with a decision. We do not turn people away in government. Everyone has a right to their services, and we serve everybody. Everybody is our customer. So that is a very different kind of ball of wax when it comes to how an organization can kind of internalize and operationalize something new, something different. But because of that very messy process, it should and can be very reflective of the communities they serve. And that is very powerful because the ideas and innovations that can start or be grown and fostered within government can benefit many different communities and in a lot of different ways. And I think that's really exciting. And I think we shouldn't discard the potential of partnership with our public institutions to make sure that we're really solving problems that matter.
Yeah, this is a baby in bathwater scenario.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit like to me. And it's amazing as you think about maybe some of the cultural divisions that have started to define our voting populace.
Sure.
That this is Kevin's opinion.
Yep.
I'd love to hear your take on this. I think that those have been manufactured because the people who are most impacted. So I think of, we'll just say, poverty in the urban core and poverty in the rural market. When those people get to know each other, they find out that they are the same people. In many, many ways, but there's been a divide that's been created because if they did understand and they were together, then their voting block would be larger and would change the dynamics of how all of this happens.
Well, there is a lot of power and control things when you think about, particularly in government, we think about that all the time, right? That is, you're stewards of public funds, there's a certain level of responsibility, you're beholden to a lot of people. So power and control are always something that's kind of being considered, I think, either proactively or just reactively.
Sure.
But I do think that what you see with some of the work that's happened around building public spaces that bring people together, like the space you've created here at Keystone is a great example. If you can bring those people together and create those spaces where they're interacting, then you start to see real solutions. I think what has happened is that we have become this false narrative of we are so connected now and we have all of these communities that we're part of, but a lot of them are very artificial and there's just something that you cannot replace in our democracy, which is the face-to-face interaction. Now, the town halls of having everyone in the same room are probably, harder to do now because we're competing for everyone's time. But the reality is that neighbor to neighbor, we're more likely to agree if we have to talk to each other in person than if we're on next door and railing at each other.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That seems to have fragmented this idea of community and not enabled larger, more connected communities, or only connected by wire or by the technology. We're not connected. The connectedness of the people is not there anymore. Yeah. Your report for LA, you talked about creating happy mobility. Mm-hmm. What does transportation happiness mean to the real world?
So we know that there's several things that people will always need when they rely on transportation, right? You want reliable transportation, you want things, a schedule that you can understand, get where you need to go, those kind of basic things. It needs to be safe. Okay, those are all the standards that we kind of know as a society we want. Transportation happiness wanted to take it a little bit further, which is this idea that we become very disconnected when we surround ourselves in these metal or plastic boxes and drive around yelling at each other because nobody else knows how to drive as well as you.
That?
Oh, I just know that as the constant navigator in the house, I am convinced that my husband's yelling will never change anyone else's driving behavior, but he's going to keep trying.
Yeah, fair enough.
And so, but I do think so. But this idea that we disconnect a little bit in the way that we move, and that makes us less likely to identify with the neighborhoods that we speed through at great cost to human life, as we know that it is a public health crisis what has happened in terms of traffic violence in this country. And we also do not allow a lot of communities to decide for themselves how and where they need to move. And that is a big issue. And so Transportation Happiness tried to build a metric that would help us evaluate kind of all of those different aspects of the mobility experience as part of a whole and set that as the kind of standard. And I applaud LA at the time because they were very much trying to think about how do we rebalance our roadways. This is the kind of largest area that we publicly own as a domain together. And yet we spend all of our money and effort in preserving it for the vehicle itself and not for the people that need to move around our cities. And I think that's a fundamental kind of part of where my approach has come through the years is that human-centered approach. We need to start with the people and the problems that we're trying to solve.
So how do you balance public good and private sector efficiency? Especially when incentives necessarily aren't aligned in some of these conversations.
I mean, well, let's just be really frank. The public sector does not incentivize for good performance. There's a lot of places where there's often a lack of career ladder and opportunity within an organization. So there's some challenges that the public sector workforce faces in terms of being able to bring in and retain good talent that's going to need to do the work of many years to create the changes we want.
Right.
Systems take a long time in government. And I think, so what I would say is that I think there's a bit of work to be done on improving the public sector workforce, but then ultimately, we need, as a kind of a public, to meet in the middle in terms of our expectations. And yes, there need to be public processes. Yes, there needs to be competitive processes. I don't think government should be picking the winners, right? I think that was something that I dealt with when I was Chief Innovation Officer in our Innovation Partnership Program, is I didn't want to pick which startup was going to be the right one. I'm not good at that. Don't ask me to do that. That's why other people do that.
Right.
But I did want to work with entrepreneurs that were able to kind of come to the table with a little bit of an open slate. Like, they got an idea, they have a problem, they think they want to speak, but they're open to the conversation, because I can point to, lots of different reasons why we are the way we are that maybe doesn't preclude the solution that you've come forward with, but does help contextualize it and helps with the pitch down the road.
Right.
And definitely can lead to a better product. And I think that's the type of thing where opening those doors, creating that space, and then having people like Mayor James at the time and Mayor Garcetti in LA be willing to kind of take a risk and create that space within government to allow for a little bit of free thinking is really important.
Yeah.
So it's multi-pronged.
I've always been curious, one of the things we did, I was like 2012 or something, was, started creating these corporate reverse pitches where you'd have the corporations that would sit on the stage and talk about the problems that they were facing as seeds for entrepreneurs to, like, you go solve that problem. We are a customer waiting for you to solve that problem. Why doesn't government do more of that? And when you have GovTech startups that are doing good work, it seems to still be this, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, and this is what I'd like to get your take on, is, too risky. Too risky to work with a startup, too risky to work with an early stage company, too risky just in general for us to engage in innovation.
Know how to ask for those services. That's the thing. I mean, let's be real. You can have a really important solution that would work and do incredible things, but if there's not an RFP, a request for proposals, or a direct solicitation to purchase it, it doesn't get in.
Right.
So I think one of the things, and we've seen a lot of work, and I don't disagree that there, I should say, not the double negative, I completely agree that there are a lot of examples of kind of the failed promises of civic tech and gov tech. And I think it creates a lot of skepticism for good reason within City Hall. I think you look at some of the old systems of past where they would bond and spend a lot of money on these software upgrades that they'd be paying off for decades after it was no longer a point of utilization.
Right.
So technology and government don't always have a great history, but I do think there's a lot of people that have really been intentional in looking at the purchasing process. And I think that's where you see, organizations that have built in innovation centers within their local government to find that opportunity, to create that opportunity. But also, I think looking at the procurement world, I think we're seeing that change. And I think you've had catalytic moments like COVID, and now we have a whole nother set of national policy changing, which can affect our supply chain. I think we'll see a lot more innovation in procurement as a result of that. And I know I'm looking at it from a regional perspective because we have a cooperative purchasing program, but don't have a ton of use of it. So we're missing some of the scale. And I think for entrepreneurs, that's the type of thing that there's a lot of potential in, is that regional level collaboration where you're maybe finding more than one customer at a time, and also kind of creating some interoperability even within the region.
So I used to argue against the idea of having a chief innovation officer in corporate because I was a believer that innovation happens
should be
everywhere. It should be everybody's job.
Yep.
but you need someone maybe to steward a culture, steward a process, help those organizations, help the accounting team understand how they can be more innovative. And that was more the role of maybe a CIO in a corporate world. I hear you talk about procurement, and it sounds like that's the decisioning power in government is that procurement office. What was your experience like as a chief innovation officer in government in dealing with that balance?
Yeah. I think...
and was it different in Kansas City and in the work you did in LA? Did you see market differences in the...
Well, just the structure of local government. And I think that's another thing that people really struggle with when it comes to scaling in GovTech is that every single city is a little bit different. Yeah. And so the way that the city of Los Angeles handled its purchasing was very different and to the experience I had in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas. But I do think I found good allies, and I think that's where the approach has often has been for a lot of my peers in the civic innovation space, which is you go with the folks that are willing to give you a shot. I do think it's important to have a chief innovation officer because you do need someone to assume the risk. You do need someone who's going to help people understand the why behind pursuing something that may not be clear from the start. Which is very, government's very reactive. We build policy in response to a tragedy or what happened before, right? It's very difficult to be proactive in setting policy. And
Why is that?
Because democracy is messy and it's accumulation of all of our things. I mean, look at our Constitution. It's everything plus all the case log, right? But so I think that is kind of inherently what it is. And democracy is messy. We don't have someone who can come in and just be like, you have to get rid of all your diesel cars by this year, and that'll happen, right? We just don't have that type of authority because of the messiness of our democracy.
Yeah, fair. I want to shift a little bit to entrepreneurship because you have a chapter.
Small one, but a proud one.
Yeah, so CityFi.
Yes.
So to bridge kind of the innovation gaps, but between cities, companies, and citizens, what made you want to make that shift from being inside government to being, on the outside and kind of, taking that approach?
Yeah. Well, I had a 1-year fellowship that was going to end, so I had to figure something out. That was. I went back out to Los Angeles for a year for that fellowship, and then one of my advisors on that fellowship was Gabe Klein, and then another peer of mine who had been the chief technology officer in Chicago, John Tolva. They were kind of mulling around this idea, and so they called me up because what I had done in Kansas City and what I had done in LA was really try to just help shape a different narrative of what the future could be, and do it with a responsible lens of how do we do it without impacting people negatively and improving outcomes for our community. And Gabe's very entrepreneurial and John Tolva's very entrepreneurial, and they're like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Maybe you want to be part of our network or whatever. And I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going all in.
Right.
And so there we go. And literally the last day of my fellowship was a Friday, and we launched the company website on Saturday and made the announcement on Monday. So it was like no time off.
Here
Let's
we go. Yeah.
And it was incredible because I had often been frustrated in my career at local government that not being able to see how things could scale, either because the duration of time that I'd been in, roles in cities wasn't long enough to see the outcome, or I wasn't able to be convinced that model could scale. And now suddenly we had the opportunity to talk and work with cities at scale, and that was pretty cool.
Uh-huh. What'd you learn in that experience? That you didn't expect to learn, I guess.
Yeah, rapid reward miles mattered a lot. I got really good at booking flights.
Yeah.
I think there is incredible value when the work that you do can make a difference. And how you measure that and what you measure matters. And I think CityFi was an opportunity for me as someone who had been very kind of civically engaged and kind of, I'll volunteer my time to do that stuff, to figuring out how to actually get paid to do the work that I was really passionate about. It was a really awesome opportunity to learn how to do that. And I feel very grateful to have been with people that could help me figure it out and not have to go it alone.
What was so I would assume that maybe you expected to learn some of that. That was some of the things that you maybe were maybe a desired outcome or that you expected to run into? What were some of the unforeseen things that you ran into when you were with CityFi, when you were, leading that?
So we were partners in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and then John moved to Denver, and I was out in Los Angeles. So we worked for years without being in the room together on a regular basis.
Okay.
So we would intentionally kind of pair up on projects and stuff like that, so we could both be in the same city at the time, but it was never on our own turf. So that was a very kind of interesting dynamic, gave me a lot of kind of understanding of space, and co-working was really hot because this was right, we were doing some really cool stuff. So we were all kind of thinking about that, and then COVID happened. And I think how we as a company would navigate that moment in time where suddenly our world of travel just changed. The priorities of cities have radically changed overnight. So how would we adapt as quickly as we had to help our clients adapt, because they too were all of a sudden kind of in a tailspin. And I think it was something that we could never have imagined. And I think all of us reacted to it individually different ways. I mean, I had another baby, so I just was like, okay, let's just deal with this, make a good thing come out of it. But yeah, it was a very trying time, and I don't think anyone had it on their radar. I mean, it's once in a generational thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What was of the projects you worked on in CityFi, of the things that you were able to touch and influence and impact, what was like your favorite, or what was the one that you...
Full stop West Hollywood. I did their smart city plan, and the reason why that project was amazing are the people that I got to work with at the city. And we really had kind of a trusted partnership where I would go in and work with them and kind of sit in their city hall and listen to what their office was like during the day. So I could at least get a sense of like, who's talking, who's not talking, what are these interactions that are happening or not happening? But also like, what's the temperature around smart cities and all these ideas? Like, these are shiny objects for a lot of folks that are just trying to provide basic services.
Sure.
And it was really cool because the two clients on the City of West Hollywood side were all in, and they helped bring a lot of other people with them. So I got to be kind of a helpful proxy for them when the hard conversations around how do you prioritize this in your budget? How do you make room for this in public policy? I could be a strong advocate on their behalf, but also we were building their capacity at the same time, and then they've gone on and continued to build and do wonderful things for the City of West Hollywood and beyond. And it's been really cool just to see how I got to work kind of so closely with someone where typically, you kind of hand off at the end of the day and hope everything goes well. But this one, we kind of saw it through together, and that was really amazing.
Yeah. In corporate, I saw a lot of things that would be, mandated from the top down, and you would hit a point in the organizational structure where, everybody had a veto.
Yep.
There was somebody who could stop things. In the West Hollywood experience, was the leadership was the organization small enough to where it could permeate that barrier, or was there buy-in all the way through? Like, what was the difference when you had that kind of leadership? But
the organization was definitely small. It's a smaller city in the LA County, so there is that feeling of like we're kind of all in it together. But because of the nature of West Hollywood being in part of LA County, which is the most populous county in the country, there is a lot that goes through that city that has nothing to do with the city itself. And so for them, I think what they started to do is realize they need to figure out how to embrace innovation, because they're going to get wiped out by the identity of other cities around them or the larger policies of others. And they really wanted to differentiate, this is who we are as West Hollywood. And so I think their leadership was kind of open to the idea, and then they just had these two wonderful human beings that were willing to kind of be the inside cheerleaders on this and continue to push that kind of that threshold of what we will take on as a new idea and risk and innovation.
Interesting. So let's just play it out. You're mentoring a startup that's going to pitch some civic innovation to a municipal government. What's the smartest way for them to navigate that bureaucracy, and what do you think are the things that most often get ignored?
Don't give up. Sometimes the first person you call is not the right person, and sometimes that person doesn't know who the right person is. So if you think you have a good enough idea, keep calling.
Not that person?
Maybe not that person, maybe find somebody else in the directory. But I do think kind of keep an open mind. Government is siloed. So something like engineers who do this job here may actually also exist in another department, but they don't necessarily work together. And so I think it's really important to understand and recognize the audience. With that, I think thinking about what your value proposition is and really, understanding that sometimes it starts as a no, because there is that culture sometimes too. Not every government has it. Not every person within the public sector is like that. But there is a bit of that because we get asked to do a lot of stuff all the time. Sure. So if it's a no, understand why it's a no, because I think you could probably figure out how to counter that. And sometimes you just need to kind of build a little bit of trust with the person that you're speaking to by helping them understand that you're actually really invested in understanding the problem that they're trying to solve.
Interesting. Are there repeatable playbooks for change that you've seen work? Does you mentioned that each city is its own and unique. Are there things that you see that city over city or that could be repeated?
Absolutely, because the reality is we all have infrastructure issues. We all have quality of life issues. We all have hopes and dreams for people, and they're not that different. We have basic needs as human beings, and cities are the kind of marketplace for all of that. So I think that's where the scale is there, because while there may be specific ordinances or different kind of understanding of who makes decisions, right? There's a city manager model, there's the mayor model, there's a bunch of different ways that government is structured. So who makes decisions depends on the community. But I do think we all share some very common needs. And so if you can, I think, and cities do really well by seeing what other cities have done. Okay. So you get in with one, you might be able to take that and move to the next one very easily.
And is that, what are those connections? Are there cities that don't want to do that because they have this, not invented here mentality? Or are there cities that are more, I think thoughtful about observing what other cities are doing? You see the National League of Cities, you see the mayor's conferences, you see all these opportunities for them to share. What's the differentiator between some of those things?
I think it's, some of it is recognizing the scale of the city makes a big difference. So I think, there's going to be a lot less flexibility for a smaller city that may not even have staff. I mean, some cities can literally be the clerk and the mayor, and that's it. So there's going to be issues of kind of like the reality of doing something, particularly when it's more experimental or newer to the market, that can be harder. So I think finding the right size city is important. But I would say there's groups like you said, the National League of Cities, there's NACTO, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, has done some really cool work in terms of cohorts. And I think that is something that is very active even still, that cities will look at even collective purchasing. I mean, we have a mechanism that we can use that allows us to buy stuff out of Texas, and I haven't quite figured out how that works yet, but that is something that local governments here can do because they can tag onto that contract. So there are existing mechanisms. It's not, you don't have to go out and invent something brand new. But I think who those people are that you talk to first, that makes a big difference, because you do need a champion inside City Hall from time to time, and having someone who can help you navigate that will be really critical.
Whether it's the transportation, the transportation pieces that we were talking about earlier, whether it's working in government or working with government, there's a theme that keeps coming back up that, people, like this is, I think we too often think about these things as just like this monolith institution, and we forget that, whether it's an industry, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a startup, whether it's government, it's a collection of people. Any organization is just a collection of people.
Absolutely.
And so I guess my question is, if you're someone who is approaching a city, what is the best way to maybe humanize that contact or, build that relationship? And is relationship building as important when you're dealing with government than maybe when you're dealing with some other types of entities where it is relational?
Yeah. I mean, I think yes, but it tends to be structure in government, right? I have had very unusual engagements and positions in government where I haven't had to go through some of the testing and structure that happens at different levels within the organization. So there's a whole kind of hierarchy that happens, and you see that in obvious ways in public safety where there's literally, chiefs and others. But that structure does exist within government as well. It just may not be as obvious. It usually can tell who's management and who's not by whether or not they're wearing a uniform or not wearing a uniform. And that's pretty much as basic as it can get.
Okay.
I think relationships matter because it takes time. And so, sometimes it can start with an elected, someone who knows their job really well, knows who the people are that are making things happen within local government. An elected official could be a great avenue in because they're champions for their city too, and they want to see something cool, and they want to get that work done as well. So that's a great way. So if you know your elected official, that can make a difference. Being visible in your community, particularly as a place to start, is also important. You can be engaged and civically involved without shortchanging your business, but also building that relationship. And I do think that entrepreneurs in general bring so much value and perspective to government that it is something that we should be encouraging just wholesale. And I can tell you right now, those relationships do make a difference over time.
It seems like it's harder to build relationships in government because there are certain stipulations, certain rules. If we go have coffee.
Yep, I wouldn't let you buy my coffee, but it's just easier that way for me.
Sure.
I think most people know those rules, hopefully in government, so it makes it easier for them to make that decision. But I do think, yes, that makes it a little bit harder. You can't show up. I've also worked for corporations where we couldn't offer lunch to someone who was coming in from the public sector.
Sure.
So, it works both ways.
Yep.
But I do think, yes, it does make it harder. But, a lot of folks that are working in public service they're committed, they're there for a long time. So they have that institutional knowledge that you won't find on their website. And knowing and meeting people that can help you navigate those internal kind of operations can be really helpful.
I want to shift to the technology side because a lot of the work that when we talk about smart cities, this is really just about technology infrastructure. Absolutely. In so many ways. But you've talked about that digital infrastructure is for the people and really must serve the actual people. What do you think, what tech solutions are a lot of cities getting wrong right now by not having that focus on the tech serving the people?
I think transportation it's one of the reasons why I was excited to take on that fellowship in Los Angeles, because I do see how transportation has become so different. It was as pre-COVID, what transformed in terms of transportation network companies coming onto and practicing in cities and working their model out, changed the way that people think about driving. I grew up, you weren't supposed to get in a car with a stranger, right? And yet that's radically changing. But yet it wasn't solving the problem of me as a mom that needs to move my kid around, or a senior who might need, certain type of accommodations to be able to get from door to door. So it started to kind of raise that question of how do we solve that problem. I think we haven't created the right kind of platform yet. There's been some really great work in establishing standards so that we can create a kind of a digital twin or a city that can operate through the data, so you can start to understand how people are moving around the community, and then you can address where there are gaps, either through policy or through deployment. And I think some cities have made some real headway with that, but then I think the transportation landscape has also changed quite radically, and so we've seen a huge reset. I would love to see technology help us address public transit, particularly in communities like ours, where it is very difficult to support it with the current model and the traditional technology. I think that would change access to so much opportunity, healthcare, jobs, education. Transportation is the number 2 cost for your households. We got to fix that. Housing's another one, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll bring you back to talk about housing. Yeah, absolutely. Ashley, when you and I first met, you were kind of leading a public-private partnership with Cisco, Sprint, and the city of Kansas City, Missouri, to deploy the streetcar, the smart city infrastructure that went along with that. What did that teach you about deploying technology at scale?
It's really hard. Actually, I would almost thank Google Fiber before that for giving me a little bit more of a reality check, because they were pulling fiber when I joined the mayor's office. And it was really interesting to see this massive company, which you think has unlimited means, really struggle with physical infrastructure. Because suddenly we had streets that had to be torn up and torn up again and then torn up another time, and it just really, you got to see that infrastructure is really hard. So I had the benefit of that. So I wasn't under too many misgivings in terms of like, this isn't gonna be easy. What happened is one of the things I think was the biggest lesson learned from that project was cities fail a lot to future-proof. And that's a weird, kind of ugly word for some folks, but things like at one point in the streetcar project, they value engineered conduit out of the streetcar station stops, which is such a bummer because it means all of a sudden you either have to tear up this beautifully poured cast concrete or you don't go with the next evolution or what you need next, right? And so while that could be solved with a lot of other ways, I think it's one of those things where at that point in time, that was the tool for future-proofing some of this infrastructure. And we were lucky to catch it and get it back in because of this partnership that had been brought forward by Cisco and Sprint on really kind of thinking through how we could add that digital layer to the streetcar line.
If every city in America called you tomorrow, one piece of tech or data infrastructure would you have them deploy?
That's a very hard one. I have a very healthy skepticism about surveillance and data collection in the public realm. So I would actually argue that you need to look at your policies first before you deploy the technology and make a decision as to what data is acceptable from a public perspective to be collected, period. Because we know we do a lot of surveillance in some of our most kind of violent neighborhoods in the cities across the country. We do a lot to surveil them. That does not make for better outcomes. We just collect an awful lot of data on people. So I think for me, the answer I would have to the question is, do you know what you want from the technology? Because I don't know if that's always what is being led with. And I think that understanding of what is my handshake with you in the public realm about what I am okay with being collected on me. And I think we need to have more conversations about that as a society.
So let me ask you then to be devil's advocate on this one a little bit.
Yes.
And maybe I've seen behind the curtain on some of these things. There is a fear of that surveillance and that data being used maliciously, but are cities really mature enough and have the infrastructure to actually store and do anything with the data?
Public safety is, certainly. I think certainly a lot of like license plate reader technology and body cam stuff, they're learning how to do at scale. It's expensive and lots of things go into that. So, and puts these departments at new risks that they never had before because now they have more data. But yes, I mean, absolutely. The kind of evolution of cities in terms of kind of catching up with technology, we're very nascent. But I think that's okay because I think we'll see some of the winners of today may not be winners in a few years from now, and some of the investments and decisions that they can make that take time can't necessarily try to keep up with the way that technology is changing. But I do think that you're seeing more cybersecurity personnel being brought in. I think there's a lot of reservation about AI just because there's not a lot of clear application that works or is evident to the public sector at the local level yet. Mm-hmm. But there's so much potential. I mean, I think about the volume of information I deal with every day. Right. Having AI to help me with all of that for sure could just be a game changer. But I do think that there are some efforts to skill up. I think that pipeline to the public sector workforce is really important, and investing in opportunities like some of the fellowships that I've had where, a foundation paid to have someone embedded in government to look at the problem a little bit differently.
I remember having conversations I was on the Sprint side of the equation when we were having, this smart city conversation and doing some of the work we were doing there. And I remember vividly people saying to me, like, I don't know that I would ever get on public Wi-Fi because I don't want the city seeing what I'm surfing on my phone, yes. What I'm doing. I'm like,
no.
Who at the city's looking at that?
Nobody.
I was just like, nobody. Like, they don't have the infrastructure to actually store that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, and I think that would be the other thing, and this was a continuity issue, but having someone who could help immediately with the use cases and how could we deploy those sooner so that by the time the technology was up and running, we kind of were ready to show public works, this is how it works for you. And I moved. We lost a little bit of kind of continuity in City Hall.
For sure.
So that was a challenge, but some people really tried to step up and keep the project going, and thank goodness they did, because they got something done.
Yep.
But it definitely, learned a lot from that.
Yeah, no, I get it. So you had the opportunity to work in cities where, this urgency and this red tape clash often happen. Like, these problems are here, they're urgent, they're now, we have to solve them. But it is a bureaucracy, and there are things that slow it down, and many times those are intentional. What personal tools or rituals have helped you lead in those kind of situations, or in those slower systems, if you will?
Yeah, I probably keep way too many projects going at the same time because of how long it takes to do things.
Okay.
So there's a bit of that, but that's also just who I am. I like to have my fingers in a lot of pots.
Yep.
I'm also a systems thinker, so I see one thing and then suddenly I can kind of connect it with 4 other things that I've seen other people doing, and I try to bring all those people together. I'm passionate about that. For me, I think the one thing that I have found to be the biggest success in my career is seeing when people around you are successful, and being a little bit a part of that has been really amazing. So I've been working really hard over the last many years to build really great teams around me, and I feel very privileged to have worked with people that I just feel like are awesome on their own and even better as a team. And, who knows where those individuals will go. But I think understanding the importance of having good collaborators around it's make or break.
I want to talk about your experience as an educator. Mm-hmm. What do you see youth right now in terms of getting excited about the future of cities or not?
Yeah, well, I have a 13-year-old here with me today, and she definitely sees the city through the eyes of an architect and urban planner, who are both of my husband and I. I think what I'm impressed by, kind of the commitment to mission and some of the ideas and value-driven and kind of experiential kind of changes that we've seen in terms of where people's priorities are and generations have shifted. I hope, and one of the things I'll be working on over the next several years, is trying to help people understand more about what those opportunities are within their community, because I do think that even if it's just a quick tour of duty, a couple of years working in the public sector, it will change the way that you see the city around you.
You think that should be required?
I would love that. Even if it was a volunteer or internship program through high school, where every kid in high school, and there are cities that do that now. I think Boston, the city of Boston just did a thing for the summer that any kid that goes to Boston Public Schools who wants an internship with the city is guaranteed to have one that's paid over the summer. Wow. I mean, awesome.
Yeah.
The woman that I hired as my public information officer over at Unified Government, she was an intern in high school at the Public Works Department and would never even known to apply for her local government for this job if she hadn't had that internship.
Do they see high engagement in that program in Boston? I mean,
I think this is their first year, so we'll have to circle back with that. But I think it sounds really promising, and they're really excited about it.
I would love to understand that more. Just this idea that there is this disillusionment with how government works for people today.
Yep. Government is the people. If we do not work for the government, it is not going to be of us. And I think that's something that we need to really remind ourselves that. If you want to complain about something, go for it.
Yeah.
If you want to fix something, go work in government, and you might actually be able to do something with a lot of other people around you. It's not just government, and you can't think government's going to solve everything, or you're going to be very disappointed. But you can have a convening and capacity to do something that is really kind of cool.
What's the one belief that you held early in your career that you've let go of because of your experiences?
Can't do it all.
I
mean, I'm a mother of 4. If nothing else, life has shown me that you can't be everything to everyone all the time. So you really need to know when to say yes, when to say thank you, but maybe not right now. But also, there's been some times I've had to say no, and that's been very difficult because I like to do a little bit of everything all the time.
Yeah.
And saying no is very hard. But learning to do that has helped me strike the balance that I need to be a better mom, to be a better wife, to be a better partner, to be a better, colleague, whatever. if I don't give 100% to all of those areas of my life, I'll be sad. So I need to give 100% to myself first.
How do you try to set those priorities for yourself? Like what kind of boundaries or guardrails do you set to be able to say no now?
I would say that is a constant dialogue, right? I don't think I figured it out perfectly. I think I go through periods of my life where it's very clear and very easy to set those guardrails.
Yep.
Others, it's harder. I have a 1-year-old, and this whole year has been a blur trying to figure it all out again.
Yeah, those are big concrete guardrails.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But I do think, just recognizing that you too are growing and changing. So I think that's something that I've really, particularly as I've gotten older, started to appreciate that I have done a pretty good job of embracing those moments that cause me to kind of maybe pivot a little bit in my own expectations.
So I greeted you on our, we had a prep call on this, and I greeted you by saying "Blello," and you looked at me as if I was crazy. And so last night I sent you a link to the Tiny Chef show. So I have to ask you, what did you think of that?
Oh, I'm definitely in the fan club now.
Yeah, right?
It just brought joy, and I think we need joy. I think we need hope as well, but I think things like that it just made me so happy.
Yeah, if you guys haven't checked out the Tiny Chef show on Instagram, you're missing out. Seriously, it is the best thing going on the internet right now. I see some people probably scrolling to it right now. You should do it for sure. Do you think there's enough joy in government in kind of the civic arena?
It's hard right now. I would say hug your favorite public sector employee when next time you see them, because man, it is tough. It's a hard environment in general. I think to be in public service is definitely a service. You are committed. You maybe take a little bit less pay to do something that's extremely rewarding, and I think that's okay. But it's a hard environment. I think I think it's up to us to make sure that it's a better environment. We have to be understanding that maybe the trash doesn't get picked up when it's 105 degrees outside. Those are things that affects people. People are behind that trash truck, right?
Yep.
I mean, that makes a difference. So having a little bit of patience as a society and maybe a little bit more civility in the way we engage would go a long, long way. But
Sure.
I do think there can be a lot of joy. And that was what I got to do at the UG. I hope to do that more at Mark, where now I get to work with 119 different cities.
Yeah.
And maybe bring a little bit of that joy, because I think you have happy people, they're going to do a better job for you.
Yeah, and the work you're doing at Mark, Mid-America Regional Council right now, part of what you're focused on is this public sector workforce issue.
Yeah.
And I think we've touched on that a little bit, but like, where do you see the biggest opportunity?
Yeah.
Really for local government, regional government to kind of change that narrative and that dialogue?
Well, I think how we hire and who we hire matters, right? You want to bring people into the organization that reflect shared values, and I think being clear on what those values are. So I think as agencies try to think about what their next generation is, and as we see the silver tsunami of people retiring, we need to think about what the culture of these organizations are. I'm hoping to do some matchmaking with some of the incredible workforce development programs that we have to open positions and try to find new ways of helping open up opportunities, but also just open people's eyes to what is possible. We have a lot of programs that we run through Mark. Head Start's a great example, where we invest in workforce development programming around childcare and early childhood development. So there's a lot of things that have already been in place that just need to be stitched together a little bit more succinctly, and maybe kind of tested in a few ways to kind of see how the model will work so that we can build for scale. I like that I kind of got a pretty messy portfolio of things under local government services I got to kind of figure out over the next few months. And
Like your hands and your fingers.
well, yeah, exactly. But trying to find that continuity and where can we leverage the work that's being done by lots of really talented individuals into something even greater, because we're running in parallel, but we're running together.
Yeah. So I ask all the guests, what's the dumbest idea you've ever had that people told you was crazy or wasn't going to work that ended up being successful?
That's a hard one. Opening Hale Cook Elementary.
Okay.
I moved here in 2010. School district was unaccredited. There was an empty building. A school board member asked me if I would be interested in talking to the families that lived around it. They wanted to open the school up. 4 years later, got it done.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Still
it was
open?
crazy.
Yeah. Was that something you had thought about doing previously, or was it just one of those
it just
somebody
was a
approached
need.
you?
It was just a need. I had just moved to Kansas City. I didn't have any friends, so I had nothing else to do. And it was like, hey, there's this empty
I'm
building.
going to open a school, yeah.
And it was a beautiful building. So from the architect in me was just happy to make it do something. But yeah, I knew I'd eventually have children. My eldest daughter was enrolled, but never got to go there. So unfortunately, we never actually enjoyed the school, but it is still open and running.
Yeah, chapter 1, how to
Yeah.
make friends and influence people,
Yeah.
open a school. I mean, not something I've ever read.
Oh, yeah.
If you could redesign one piece of urban life, anything from stoplights to city council meetings, with no budget limits, no policy implications or, headwinds, what would it be?
Housing.
Okay.
We need, as a country, to have everyone be able to afford where they live, not just some people. More people than that should be are living well beyond what they can afford, and often in unhealthy environments. So I would love to see wave my magic wand and have quality housing that's affordable, that's dense, that's mixed, that gives people the opportunity to grow up and age out in their community, walk to where they care about, what they need most in life, but also just to have a stable housing environment for all the people that live in Kansas City.
From your mouth to bureaucrats' ears, hopefully. So yeah, Ashley, thanks for all the work that you've been doing, and thanks for continuing to be a public servant and to take your immense amount of skills and experience and apply it to our local economy and our local work here. I appreciate it, and having known you for a while, it's amazing to see you continue to put the passion and the effort behind the work that you're doing. So
thanks, Kevin. And it is such a pleasure to be here, and so amazing to see what you've been doing too.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm going to hold you to coming back and talking about some of the work that you are doing. And definitely I want to dig deeper on this housing issue at some point in time. So great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Give her a hand, everybody.